Usually when we talk about getting a medical diagnosis, there's this, I don't know, this underlying expectation of precision. Like it feels like engineering.
Right, yeah. It's supposed to be an exact science.
Exactly. You fall off a bike, your arm hurts, you go to the hospital,
Hmm.
and the doctor puts you in the x-ray machine, pulls up that black and white image, and just points to a jagged white line, and they say, there it is, right there.
Yeah.
It's incredibly clean.
Right, it's entirely binary. I mean, the bone is broken or it is not broken. There is absolutely no debate, no nuance, and psychologically that is profoundly comforting to us.
Oh, totally. We love it.
We really do. We like things to be visible. We like them to be neatly categorized and fixable. It gives us a sense of control.
It really does. But then you step away from the physical body and you step into the world of human behavior. You step into the deep, honestly, kind of messy psychology of why we actually do the things we do. And suddenly it's like that x-ray machine is just completely broken.
Yeah, completely shattered.
Right. We're looking at a diagnostic landscape that is, well, it's incredibly murky. We try to pinpoint why a friend suddenly stopped talking to us or, why we ruined a perfectly good diet or why a boss is making these wildly irrational decisions. And there's no jagged white line to point to.
No, there isn't. It is the absolute definition of diagnostic muddy waters. Because when it comes to the human mind, and specifically the causes of our most destructive or confusing behaviors, the true drivers are rarely visible on the surface. They are buried under, layers of socialization, ego, and just deep biological history.
And that murky landscape is exactly what we are navigating today. We've got this really fascinating stack of excerpts from Robert Greene's The Laws of Human Nature, and we're going to use this material to decode what the text provocatively calls the stranger within us.
The stranger within us. It's a great phrase.
It really is. The goal of this deep dive is to really understand those invisible primal forces that dictate human behavior, often totally without our permission. And I think to really get the value out of this dense material, we're going to break the text down section by section today.
I think that's the best way to handle it.
Yeah, so for each section, we'll rigorously explore the core premise, look at how it logically links to the other ideas, look at the specific evidence provided, and then, and I think this is crucial, we'll make a critical observation of the assumptions being made. And finally, we'll boil it down to a singular main takeaway.
Sounds like a solid plan. And, it's a compelling premise to start with because, honestly, every single person listening has experienced the stranger.
Oh, absolutely.
We all have those moments of, retrospective shock. You find yourself in the aftermath of a situation asking, what in the world came over me?
Yes, like why did I snap at my coworker over a completely minor typo?
Right, or why did I self-sabotage that relationship when I consciously, logically knew it was a healthy one?
And what do we usually do in those moments? I mean, we blame the traffic. We blame the coffee we didn't have. We say, oh, I just wasn't myself today.
Precisely. We blame external circumstances to protect our ego. But the central argument here, and this is what we really have to dig into, is that this stranger isn't a glitch. It's not a temporary departure from your true self. The stranger is actually your deeply ingrained evolutionary wiring.
Which is kind of terrifying to think about.
It is. It's an ancient operating system that functions almost entirely below the threshold of your conscious awareness.
So I want to speak directly to you listening right now. If you have ever been baffled by the people around you, if you've wondered why a colleague suddenly turned on you and subtly sabotaged a project, or why you keep finding yourself repeating the exact same toxic relationship dynamic over and over, this deep dive is designed to give you clarity.
Absolutely.
We aren't just going to float around in abstract psychological theory today. We're going to unpack this as a practical code book for your actual life.
And to make this a truly practical code book, we really have to start by tearing up a very comforting illusion we all hold about our own autonomy.
Oh, this is the hard part.
It is. We have to look at section 1, which is the evolutionary foundation.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because the text here really aggressively reframes how much control we actually have over our daily choices. The core premise here, simplified, is that human behavior isn't largely driven by conscious-willed, logical decisions. Instead, it's propelled by these primal ancient forces. And if we actually want to gain control of our lives, we have to stop making those superficial excuses about traffic or a bad night's sleep and look at the root biology.
Right.
It made me think of this analogy, and tell me if this tracks. It's like riding a horse.
Oh, I like that. That's a great way to visualize it.
Right, because our conscious waking minds, our prefrontal cortex, we think we are the ones steering. We're sitting up top, holding the reins, looking at the map, completely convinced we are in charge.
We feel like the captain of the ship.
Exactly. But the horse, which represents our primitive, deeply emotional, millions of years old neurological wiring, that horse is doing all the actual heavy lifting. And the terrifying truth is, if that horse gets suddenly spooked by a snake in the grass, it does not matter how hard you yank those reins.
Not at all.
The horse is deciding where you go. You are just along for the terrifying ride.
It perfectly captures the dynamic. We think we are the rational rider in absolute command, but we're essentially at the mercy of the massive, powerful animal we are sitting on. And the conceptual link here is that accepting this is foundational for the rest of our discussion today.
Yeah, it's the baseline.
It is. Before we can even begin to analyze specific, complex human behaviors, like why we feel sudden envy or why we conform to groupthink or why we develop massive egos, we first have to accept this baseline reality. We are profoundly, intimately influenced by an ancient neurological operating system that was built for a completely different environment.
But, I don't want us to just claim we're helpless slaves to our ancient brains without looking at the hard proof. I mean, how do we know this isn't just a convenient excuse for bad behavior? What's the actual evidence connecting, say, modern boardroom politics to ancient savanna survival?
Well, the source material draws a very direct line back to our early survival mechanisms. I mean, think about early hunter-gatherer tribes before the development of complex spoken language.
Okay, yeah.
Survival in that extremely harsh environment depended incredibly heavily on reading subtle facial expressions and something the text calls emotional permeability.
Emotional permeability, meaning basically emotions are contagious, like we absorb them from each other.
Exactly. It was a vital mechanism to bind the tribe together. If one person at the edge of the camp suddenly saw a predator, a lion, let's say, and felt intense fear, they couldn't always shout. Shouting might draw the predator.
Oh, right. That makes sense.
So the whole group needed to instantly, viscerally feel that fear and react in a split second just by observing the tension in that one person's body. Our nervous systems literally evolved to constantly scan other people and mirror their internal states. We are biologically wired to be infected by the moods that the people around us.
Wow. So when you walk into an office and the tension is so thick you could cut it with a knife, and you suddenly feel stressed before anyone even speaks a word to you, that's not you just being overly sensitive. That's your 5 million-year-old alarm system going off.
Precisely. Your inner horse is smelling a predator. And the text takes this a step further into something we see every single day, which is our obsession with status.
Oh, yeah. Status anxiety.
Right. We tend to view status anxiety as a modern affliction. We blame Instagram or, keeping up with the Joneses or modern corporate culture. But the need to continually rank ourselves, to constantly measure our self-worth through our social standing, is a phenomenon observable in absolutely all hunter-gatherer cultures studied.
Universal.
It is. And more importantly, the text notes it's explicitly observable among chimpanzees.
So it's literally a primate thing.
It is a primate thing. Knowing your place in the hierarchy meant knowing when you got to eat and whether you got to reproduce. It was quite literally life or death. So when you feel a pang of intense anxiety because a peer got a promotion over you, that is your inner primate hitting the panic button about survival resources. It feels like life or death because to your ancient brain, it kind of is.
I love that insight. I really do. But I also think we need a critical observation here, and I want to push back on this a little bit.
Sure, go ahead.
Because while it is deeply compelling to blame our primate brains for everything, it lets us off the hook, right? It feels like this framework flirts heavily with biological determinism.
I see where you're going with this.
Yeah, it almost assumes that all irrational or destructive behavior is completely hardwired and inescapable. And I can't help but wonder if that downplays how modern societal structures or extreme economic stress or just specific toxic environments independently manufacture these behaviors.
That's a very valid point.
Like, I keep thinking about that famous behavioral experiment with rats. If you put a rat in a spacious, enriching environment with plenty of food, it acts normally. It's social. But if you shove it into an overcrowded, highly stressful, resource-scarce cage, it starts aggressively attacking the other rats.
Right.
So is that aggression evolutionary destiny, or is it just the tragic, predictable result of a really bad cage?
That is an incredibly vital distinction to make. We have to be very, very careful because biological determinism can so easily be weaponized as a convenient excuse for toxic personal behavior or to justify broken, exploitative social systems.
Right, like saying boys will be boys or greed is just human nature, so we shouldn't regulate Wall Street.
Exactly. We have to acknowledge the reality of our biological wiring without ever using it to absolve our environment or our individual choices.
So, synthesizing all of this for you listening. If the horse is often in control, what's the actual move here? The main takeaway from this evolutionary baseline is this. You are not always in conscious control of your actions, but understanding your evolutionary emotional wiring is the first step to regaining control of your life. You have to know the horse to guide the horse.
Which perfectly sets up the next major hurdle. Because if we are sitting on this emotional horse, the very first casualty of that bumpy ride is our ability to see the world clearly.
Yes, and this brings us to section 2, the law of irrationality. And this brings up a major point of friction for me regarding the text's view on rationality. Let me play devil's advocate for a second.
Please do.
We are constantly told we live in the information age, right? We are arguably the most technologically advanced, data-driven society in the history of the planet. We've mapped the human genome. We've landed rovers on Mars. We literally carry supercomputers in our pockets that can access all recorded human knowledge in seconds.
It's true, we have unprecedented access to facts.
Right. So given all of that, how can the text confidently claim we are still fundamentally irrational?
Well, because the author is trying to shatter the exact illusion you just described. The core premise here is that the fact that we have advanced technology does not mean our brains have fundamentally changed. The argument is that emotion still governs our minds far, far more than logic ever does. It causes us to make our most crucial decisions based entirely on what we want to be true, rather than what is empirically true.
So the data is there, we just completely choose to ignore it.
Exactly. Think of your emotion as a massively distorted lens on a camera.
Okay.
When you look through the viewfinder, you genuinely believe you are seeing objective reality. You are totally confident you are recording the facts. But the image coming through that lens is completely warped by your desires, your fears, and your tribal loyalties. You're basically photographing a funhouse mirror and aggressively defending it as a documentary.
Okay, that makes sense. And the conceptual link is pretty clear, right? Because if we still have that ancient emotion-driven survival brain we just talked about, it logically follows that our perception of reality is constantly being hijacked.
Yes, exactly.
But give me a modern example from the text. How does this actually play out when supposedly smart, rational people are looking at hard data?
The source material provides a staggering, undeniable modern example of exactly this. The 2008 financial crash.
Oh man, that is a perfect case study.
It really is, because think about the people involved. We had millions of highly educated buyers, sellers, mortgage brokers, Wall Street quants, and financial experts.
People with degrees in advanced mathematics.
Right. These are people whose entire job is to analyze risk and study market history. They had all the data regarding the stock market bubble and crash of 1929. They had the math right in front of them, and yet almost all of them completely ignored the flashing red warning signs.
Why? I mean, how is that possible?
Because they were emotionally infected by the lure of easy, infinite money.
Wow. Their prefrontal cortex, the logical calculating part of the brain, was just completely overridden by the primitive primate desire for resource accumulation. The horse saw an apple and just bolted.
Precisely. The collective emotional contagion completely neutralized their individual rationality. And the text traces this phenomenon through history, focusing on what it categorizes as inflaming individuals.
Inflaming individuals, like historical figures who know how to manipulate this specific glitch in our brains.
Exactly. The text points to highly charismatic, often volatile leaders, people like Alcibiades in ancient Athens, Julius Caesar in Rome, or Georges Danton during the French Revolution.
And just a quick note for the listener, we are looking at these figures purely through a psychological lens right now.
Yeah.
Not endorsing their specific politics or actions. We're just looking impartially at the mechanics of their influence.
Yes, this is entirely about the psychological mechanism. These inflaming individuals all share a specific trait. They project their own massive internal emotional dramas outward onto the public. And because humans are so emotionally permeable, like we discussed with the hunter-gatherers, these leaders are able to catch massive groups of people in a tidal wave of irrational attraction or repulsion.
They bypass the intellect entirely. They don't even bother with the logic.
Completely. People do not follow them based on a nuanced reading of their policy proposals or a logical debate about governance. They follow them because of the visceral emotional resonance. The leader feels intense anger, the crowd feels intense anger, the leader feels invincible, the crowd feels invincible.
But here's my critical observation for this section. I want to introduce an alternative perspective. The text treats this irrationality as a fundamental flaw, right? Like it's an inherently dangerous bug in the system. There's this underlying assumption that pure, cold rationality is the highest possible state of being, and emotion is just a hindrance to be overcome.
That is generally the framing, yes.
But isn't it possible that certain types of irrationality, like extreme, totally unfounded optimism, or a blind, stubborn faith in an impossible idea, are actually necessary evolutionary adaptations?
What do you mean by that? How would that be an adaptation?
Well, think about innovation. If early humans were perfectly rational, calculating purely based on established facts and safety protocols, they might never have taken the massive, terrifying risks required to migrate across uncharted oceans, right? The math would say, don't get in the tiny boat. Or think about the Wright brothers.
Oh, the airplane.
Yeah. Every perfectly rational scientist at the time said heavier-than-air flight was mathematically impossible. You kind of need a heavily distorted, irrational lens to believe you can build an airplane in your bicycle shop when the entire scientific world thinks you're crazy. Sometimes, irrational emotion is the only thing that generates enough momentum to break the status quo.
That is a brilliant counterpoint. Absolute cold rationality might actually lead to complete stagnation. You do need a little bit of the irrational fire to push boundaries. But the danger, of course, is when that fire is completely unexamined. I mean, the Wright brothers still used physics.
Right, exactly. They were wildly optimistic, but they didn't just jump off a cliff flapping their arms. They tested the wind tunnels.
Exactly. And that balance is crucial for our listeners. Emotion is the engine, but rationality has to be the steering wheel you fight to control. So the main takeaway here is profound. Rationality is not an innate human trait. It is a difficult skill that you must actively acquire by relentlessly examining the evidence that disconfirms your most cherished beliefs.
Relentlessly examining disconfirming evidence. That is so hard to do because it physically feels bad to be proven wrong. It's a huge ego threat.
It's very uncomfortable.
And that ego threat gets infinitely more complicated when we step out of our own heads and actually have to deal with other people. Which brings us to Section 3, the law of role-playing and defensiveness. Because if we're walking around with these distorted lenses completely driven by our hidden emotional wiring, what happens when we try to interact with someone else who is also operating that way?
That is when we enter the deeply complex realm of social survival.
Exactly. I like to think of human social interaction as trying to learn an incredibly complex second language. But the trick is, in this language, the actual vocabulary isn't made up of the words you speak.
No, the words are just a tiny part of it.
Right. The real communication, the core premise here, consists of microexpressions, shifts in posture, the duration of eye contact, and the tiny, tiny fluctuations in tone of voice.
That is a phenomenal analogy for what we are talking about, because the underlying reality, linking back to our irrationality, is that our inner nature is turbulent. We are full of fears, bizarre desires, and deep insecurities.
There's a mess in there.
It is. And if we walked around displaying all of that raw, turbulent emotion to everyone, society would completely collapse. So we all meticulously craft and wear social masks to survive. We project a specific front to our coworkers, a different front to our families, and another to the public.
We present the sanitized, acceptable version.
Always. And understanding this is the absolute key to influence. If you want to persuade someone or change their mind, you absolutely cannot attack their mask directly. I mean, if you walk up and hit them with a blunt, purely logical argument that contradicts their worldview, what happens?
Oh, they dig their heels in. They get instantly defensive. I've done it. I've seen it.
Exactly. The mask hardens into armor. So the strategy is counterintuitive. You must lower their resistance by validating their deepest self-opinion first. The text likens it to picking a lock. You don't try to smash a locked door down with a sledgehammer that just breaks the door and wakes up the neighbors.
Right.
Instead, you listen to the lock, you feel out the mechanism, and you gently, perfectly align the internal tumblers until the resistance gives way and it just clicks open.
This connects so perfectly to the previous point. If people are inherently irrational and emotional, throwing Excel spreadsheets and logic at them is a terrible persuasion strategy.
The worst
You have
strategy.
to navigate the emotion to even get them to look at the spreadsheet. But to pick that lock, you have to be paying intense, focused attention to them. And the text points out some evidence that humans are shockingly bad at doing that.
We are remarkably blind. The evidence provided here is one of the most striking anecdotes in the material. It cites the legendary psychiatrist Milton Erickson.
Oh, this story blew my mind. I couldn't believe it.
It's incredible. So Erickson once observed a group of bright, highly educated medical interns in a hospital setting. They were standing around an elderly female patient lying in a bed trying to figure out her complex medical condition. They debated intensely for 3 solid hours. They looked at charts, they argued medical theory, they tried to impress each other with their diagnostic brilliance. And in those 3 hours, not a single one of them noticed the blindingly obvious physical fact that the woman in the bed had no legs. They had been amputated.
Wait, really? 3 hours standing right next to her.
3 hours.
It is almost unbelievable, but it proves the point so perfectly. We get completely trapped in our own heads, obsessed with our own performance and our own internal monologue. We are completely blind to the most glaring, massive nonverbal cues right in front of us because we literally aren't looking at the other person. We are looking at ourselves reflected in them.
Yes, we were just waiting for our turn to speak, and the text argues that once you finally learn to stop looking at yourself and actually observe the other person, you can begin to pick the lock. But you have to know what tumblers you're trying to align.
Right. What are the tumblers?
According to this framework, there are 3 universal qualities of human self-opinion. Every single person, no matter who they are, fundamentally needs to believe 3 things about themselves. First, that they are autonomous, they are in control of their choices. Second, that they are intelligent in their own unique way. And third, that they are basically a good person.
That rings so true. If you make someone feel trapped or stupid or evil, the conversation is just over. The door slams shut and the locks change.
Exactly. If you want to influence someone, your communication must implicitly validate their autonomy, their intelligence, and their goodness.
But let me pause here and raise my critical observation for this section. Because while this framework is highly effective, it frames almost all human interaction as a deeply strategic, calculated game of impression management. It's almost Machiavellian, you know?
It can definitely read that way.
Yeah. Does this perspective completely ignore the existence of genuine, uncalculated vulnerability? What about pure altruism? Are there not interactions where people truly just drop the mask and connect without a hidden agenda to influence or manipulate? I worry that if you view every single conversation as a lock-picking exercise, you're going to become incredibly cynical and isolated.
It's a very fair critique. Not every interaction is a high-stakes negotiation. I mean, if you use this lock-picking framework on your spouse when they are crying over a bad day at work, you're going to come off as a sociopath.
Exactly.
You need to know when to put the lockpicks away and just be human. But in the realm of professional influence, conflict resolution, or navigating difficult personalities, the strategic value here is undeniable.
Totally. So the main takeaway for you, the listener, is this. To truly connect with and influence people, you must start focusing on what you want to say and instead observe their nonverbal cues to validate their fundamental need for autonomy and intelligence.
Now, that covers the masks we actively wear to face the world. But it naturally raises a much darker question, which brings us to Section 4, the law of compulsive behavior and repression. What happens to everything we hide behind the mask? What happens to all the weird desires, the anger, the irrational impulses that we suppress because society tells us they aren't acceptable?
This is where things get a bit spooky. And I have a big foundational question about this. We live in a modern culture that absolutely worships the idea of the makeover.
Oh, sure.
The core of self-help is new year, new you. We fundamentally believe that we can wake up tomorrow, read a book, and just reinvent our personalities. But the core premise of this text argues we actually have a deeply set, rigid character. How do we square our modern desire for reinvention with this idea that our character is essentially locked in?
The author would argue that the new year, new you mentality is mostly a comforting delusion. I know. The premise here is that your core character is firmly, almost permanently formed in early childhood. When you were young, you responded to stress or joy in certain ways, and those responses formed habit loops. Over time, those loops hardened into your character, compelling you to repeat the exact same patterns throughout your entire adult life.
So the script is already written.
Largely, yes.
Hmm.
And furthermore, all those messy traits that didn't fit into the good kid persona you needed to survive, the traits you suppressed, didn't just evaporate. They clumped together in your unconscious to form a hidden shadow personality. Think of your character formation like a river carving a canyon over tens of thousands of years.
Okay, I can picture that.
The water flowing through the canyon today might think it has free will, but it can only flow where the deep, ancient grooves have already been cut into the solid rock.
That is a phenomenal visual. And the conceptual link here is really the dark underbelly of the social masks we just talked about in the last section. If we spend all day meticulously picking locks and maintaining a polite front, there is a massive amount of repressed emotional energy building up below the surface. And the physics of emotion dictate that energy doesn't just disappear. If you don't express it, it goes underground.
And the evidence the text uses to support this isn't just, abstract Freudian theory. It's grounded in basic neurology. Character is not just a vague psychological concept, it is physical wiring. When you make a decision or react to a trauma as a young child, a specific neural pathway is formed in your brain.
Neurons that fire together, wire together.
Exactly. And every time you repeat that reaction, you reinforce the pathway. Over decades, that tiny pathway becomes a massive paved neurological superhighway. This is why it is so incredibly difficult to stop repeating self-destructive habits. You keep dating the exact same type of toxic person because your brain literally defaults to that superhighway. It is the path of least resistance.
And the evidence for that hidden shadow leaking out is something we have all witnessed in real life. The text makes a brilliant observation about contradictory behavior. It points out that people who display a saintly, over-idealized front, you know the type, the people who are just too nice, who never have a bad word to say about anyone, who are aggressively positive.
Oh, the toxic positivity crowd.
Yes, the text argues that those people almost always have a secretly aggressive, deeply envious, or explosive shadow, because they've denied their natural human negativity so completely that energy has to go somewhere. And under stress, when the mask slips, that shadow emerges explosively. It's exactly like trying to hold a giant beach ball completely underwater.
Well,
It takes a ton of continuous effort, and the harder you push it down, the higher and faster it launches into the air when your arms finally get tired and it slips out of your grasp.
which is a terrifying thought if you're walking around completely oblivious to your own shadow. You are basically a ticking time bomb. But for our critical observation, we must push back on how bleak and deterministic this framework is.
Yeah, please do, because it's depressing.
The text heavily implies that our character is permanently locked in during our earliest, most helpless years.
Right, it feels like a life sentence. If
Yeah.
you had a bad childhood, you're just doomed.
Exactly, and that perspective really seems to underplay massive modern scientific findings regarding adult neuroplasticity. We now know definitively that the adult brain retains the ability to physically rewire itself, form new neural connections, and abandon old ones, even late in life. Furthermore, this highly deterministic view kind of ignores the entire established field of trauma recovery and deep therapeutic intervention. We are not entirely, hopelessly doomed to repeat the past.
I really appreciate that pushback, because while the canyon is deep, with enough time, tools, and maybe some therapeutic dynamite, you can actually reroute the river. But you can't reroute it if you refuse to look at the canyon. So the main takeaway for the listener is this. By carefully observing your own repetitive mistakes and contradictory emotional outbursts, you can bring your hidden shadow into the light and break compulsive, self-destructive habits.
It's about making the unconscious conscious. And once we start observing our desires honestly, we run headfirst into one of the most frustrating paradoxes of human nature. Which brings us to Section 5.
Section 5. The law of covetousness and grandiosity. And I'm going to push back on this one right out of the gate.
Okay, let's hear it.
The core premise makes the claim that humans only truly want what we cannot have, the elusive, the distant. But look around us. We live in a hyper-consumerist society that is built on the exact opposite principle. Look at the staggering success of ultra-accessible mass-market products. Amazon Prime delivers in hours. Fast food is on every corner. Streaming services give us endless content instantly.
Fair.
These companies make trillions of dollars precisely because their products are instantly, frictionlessly available, not because they are elusive. Doesn't the reality of modern commerce completely contradict this supposed law of human nature?
It's a very logical critique, but the text is making a distinction between simple consumer convenience and deep psychological yearning.
Yeah.
Yes, we want our paper towels delivered instantly, but what do we covet? What keeps us awake at night? The premise here is that human desire is magnetically drawn to the unattainable, the taboo, the mysterious, and the exotic.
The thing's just out of reach.
Always. However, there's a dangerous second half to this law. When we actually cross that gap, when we attain the massive success, or we finally get the object or the person we coveted, a psychological switch flips. We don't just become satisfied, we become infected with grandiosity. We completely lose touch with the reality of our own limits and the role of luck in our success.
Oh, I've seen this. It's like,
Yeah.
imagine a person lost in the desert. They're dying of thirst, chasing a rush for days. Their desire is all-consuming. But then, by pure dumb luck, they stumble upon a real tiny puddle of muddy water. They drink it, they survive, and instantly their grandiosity kicks in. Instead of being grateful for the luck of finding the puddle, they convince themselves they're a weather god who actually commanded the rain to fall.
That is a wildly vivid analogy, but it perfectly captures the delusion. And conceptually, this links right back to our previous discussion. Our compulsive, hidden need for validation driven by those early childhood habit loops forces us to constantly seek external objects of desire to fill the void. But the tragic irony is that actually acquiring those objects triggers the irrational, distorted ego we discussed in Section 2. It is an exhausting, vicious cycle. Intense wanting, brief getting, and then losing our minds to grandiosity.
So what's the evidence for this dynamic? How do we use the unattainable to our advantage?
To prove the immense power of manufacturing covetousness, the text highlights the career of Coco Chanel.
The fashion icon.
Yes, but she was a master psychologist. She didn't just design and sell clothes. She engineered immense public desire by utilizing an androgynous appeal and aggressively flouting the traditional, rigid gender roles of her era. In the 1950s, a time of stultifying, restrictive conformity for women, Chanel offered something that felt slightly transgressive, elusive, and outside the accepted norm.
She played hard to get.
Exactly. She didn't sell fabric. She made people covet a mysterious lifestyle and a kind of freedom they were implicitly told they couldn't have. She made herself an object of fascination.
That is brilliant marketing. But let's flip the coin and look at the evidence for grandiosity. What happens when someone gets all the success and the ego takes over?
The text points to the archetype of the grandiose leader. We see this constantly in business and tech. These are leaders who achieve a massive, often highly publicized initial success. But instead of analyzing why they succeeded, they begin to believe they possess a golden touch. They start relying entirely on their own internal hunches and gut feelings, completely abandoning the science, data, or collaborative teamwork that got them there in the first place.
They start believing their own press releases.
Exactly. And they remain completely oblivious to the glaring statistical fact that their genius hunches start missing just as often as they hit. They confuse a lucky break in the market with divine, innate genius.
Okay, but here's my critical observation on this point. The text places the blame for this grandiosity almost entirely on individual human frailty. It frames it as an internal ego problem. But I think it severely fails to examine how massive corporate, political, and media systems actively reward, elevate, and purposely insulate narcissistic, grandiose behavior.
How so? How does the system do that?
Well, sometimes a CEO becomes grandiose, not just because of human nature, but because the entire ecosystem demands it. The board of directors, the venture capitalists, the stock market, they financially incentivize leaders to project the aura of an infallible god. They don't want a humble, realistic CEO. They want a visionary messiah who will pump the stock price. The system actively feeds and protects the monster until it inevitably collapses. It's not just an internal flaw. It's a reinforced business model.
That is a fantastic point. The environment acts as an incubator for the grandiosity. But even if the system encourages it, on an individual level, if you want to survive the long game, you have to manage your own psychology. So the main takeaway here is a dual strategy. To maintain your power, you must cultivate an aura of mystery to remain an object of desire to others, while ruthlessly forcing yourself to remain realistic and grounded about your own limitations.
Keep your head in the clouds and your feet in the mud. I like that. Now, speaking of holding two opposing things at once, this brings us to Section 6, the law of gender rigidity. This is a really fascinating, highly specialized application of everything we've talked about so far.
It is. This is where the text gets into the actual mechanics of how we process information and create ideas.
Right. And to explain the core premise here, I need another analogy.
Go for it.
I think of the human mind like a master chef trying to create a truly unforgettable world-class meal. To do that, the chef absolutely must possess two distinct, almost opposing skill sets. On one hand, you need the precise, hyperlinear, strictly measured science of baking. A quarter teaspoon of baking soda, exactly 350 degrees for exactly 30 minutes.
And the text aligns this strict categorizing mindset with the masculine cognitive style.
Exactly. But you can't just serve bread. You also need the chef to be able to make a complex simmering stew. And that requires a totally different mindset. It's intuitive, it's taste as you go, it's adding a dash of wine because it feels right. It's looking at how all the ingredients blend organically over time.
And the text aligns this holistic, intuitive mindset with the feminine cognitive style.
Right. And the argument here is so powerful. Every single one of us, regardless of our biological sex or outward presentation, naturally possesses both of these thinking styles. Yeah. We have the baker and the stew maker inside our brains. But because of intense societal pressure to conform to strict gender roles, we're often forced to repress one entire half of our cognitive toolkit.
We shove half of our brain into the shadow.
Exactly. And the claim is that if you can consciously reconnect with your repressed cognitive style, if you can blend the precise logic with a holistic intuition, you unlock immense, unparalleled creative and analytical power.
The conceptual link here is wonderfully direct. This is a profound, specific application of the repression and shadow concept we just explored in Section 4. We spend so much time talking about hiding our anger or our weird desires in the shadow. But Green argues that for many people, the largest, most potent trait they repress is simply their opposite gender cognitive energy. We are literally lobotomizing our own creative potential just to fit into a neat societal box.
Let's look at the evidence the text provides for this,
Yeah.
because it defines these cognitive differences quite specifically.
Yes. The text defines masculine thinking essentially as the drive to categorize, to dissect problems into tiny parts, and to think in straight, linear cause and effect processes. Conversely, it defines feminine thinking as the ability to focus on the whole gestalt, the big picture. It's about trusting intuitive flashes and understanding organic, interconnected processes where A doesn't always lead directly to B.
And to prove that true genius requires blending both of these, the text points to historical breakthroughs in science. It cites Albert Einstein, which is fascinating. We think of physics as pure, cold logic. But Einstein relied heavily on deep, intuitive flashes and abstract dream imagery to construct his theories of relativity. He would literally visualize himself riding on a beam of light.
Wow!
Yeah, he used the feminine intuition to leap to a crazy conclusion and then used the masculine math to prove it.
The text also points to Louis Pasteur, the microbiologist. He was famous for not just forcing linear experiments, but for letting varied, seemingly unrelated ideas organically cook in his mind over long periods until he suddenly saw the wide-ranging connections between bacteria, disease, and fermentation. Both of these men achieved greatness precisely because they refused to silo their thinking.
Now, I have to jump in with a massive critical observation here.
You might.
Yeah, because the underlying mechanics of this idea, blending logic and intuition, are incredibly valuable. But the author's reliance on highly traditional, deeply binary labels like masculine and feminine to describe cognitive functions feels incredibly dated and, frankly, problematic.
It carries a lot of cultural baggage.
A ton of baggage. Labeling intuition as inherently feminine or logic as inherently masculine is reductive. It reinforces the exact stereotypes the text is supposedly telling us to break out of. This framing is likely to heavily alienate modern listeners who rightfully view cognitive traits as existing on a universal, genderless human spectrum. Logic doesn't belong to men, and intuition doesn't belong to women. They are just brain functions.
I completely agree. The labels distract from the actual value of the insight. If we strip away the gendered language, what we are really talking about is cognitive diversity within a single brain. We are talking about whole brain thinking.
Exactly. So let's reframe the main takeaway for the listener to reflect that broader truth. You will reach your highest intellectual and creative potential only when you stop rigidly policing your identity and actively integrate both analytical and intuitive styles of thinking.
That integration makes you a much stronger, more resilient individual. But the ultimate test of that individual strength comes when you take that integrated brain and you drop it into a crowd. Which brings us to Section 7, the law of aimlessness and conformity.
This is the phenomenon of groupthink. And I have to ask a question that I think we all secretly feel but rarely admit. If groupthink is so historically dangerous, if mindless mobs cause so much destruction, why does it feel so profoundly physically good to just blend into a crowd? Why is it such a relief to let the group decide?
Because thinking for yourself is exhausting. It takes massive caloric energy to constantly analyze reality, fight your irrationality, and maintain your individuality. The core premise here is that simply operating within a group causes a physiological shift. We literally lose access to our individual rationality and we begin to absorb the collective mood. It's an infectious downward pull.
So how do we fight it?
The author argues that our only true defense against this gravitational pull is to develop a profound, highly individualized sense of purpose. Think of a ship on the ocean. If that ship does not have an internal engine, which represents your individual purpose, it doesn't matter how well built the ship is. It will simply be dragged helplessly wherever the massive ocean current, which represents the group, decides to take it. You must have an internal engine that is stronger than the current.
This conceptually links everything together perfectly. Because if we fail to integrate our whole self, like we just discussed, and if we fall prey to our irrational emotions, we default to the absolute path of least resistance. We give up the heavy burden of being an individual, and we blend blindly into the herd.
And the evidence shows just how insidious and granular this herd mentality gets. The text notes that when humans gather in large groups, they don't just act as one giant unified blob. They inevitably, compulsively splinter off into factions and cliques.
Why do we do that? Why do we always form an us versus them, even inside a group?
To get what the text calls a narcissistic boost, we have a deep psychological need to feel superior to someone else. Being in the right clique provides that instant, unearned feeling of superiority. And critically, the text observes that these factions are almost always led by elites who cynically manipulate the unwritten rules of the group.
Oh, I've seen that.
They constantly shift the goalposts of what is acceptable behavior to preserve their own high status, all while demanding loyalty and sacrifices from the lower members of the herd.
That is corporate office politics in a nutshell. We're a family, right up until the layoffs happen.
Exactly. Now, to show the antidote to this toxic conformity, the text highlights the life of Martin Luther King Jr.
Oh, this is a profound example.
It is. The text examines how he faced severe, crippling bouts of depression, and he was operating in an environment of incredibly chaotic, shifting, and highly emotional political factions. There was massive pressure from all sides to conform to different extremist views or to back down entirely. But he overcame the depression and the pressure by continually listening to an inner voice that connected him directly to his unique calling.
His purpose.
His purpose. That deep, unwavering sense of mission provided the internal structural cohesion he needed to stand firm and resist the rapidly shifting, deeply irrational emotions of the crowds around him. His engine was simply far more powerful than the current.
That is deeply inspiring. But as we look at this concept of conformity and aimlessness, I have to throw out a critical observation regarding how the text views people who choose to step away from the group. In discussing aimlessness, the author heavily disparages cynicism. He frames cynicism as merely a cool mask that people wear to hide their laziness, their fear of failure, or their lack of purpose.
Right, she dismisses it as a defense mechanism.
Exactly. And I think that perhaps unfairly dismisses philosophical cynicism as a highly valid, deeply intellectual response to the world. Sometimes being cynical isn't lazy. It's a profound critique of systems that are truly broken, corrupt, or fundamentally rigged. If the group you're supposed to conform to is actively toxic, walking away and refusing to play their game with a cynical eye might be the most rational, self-preserving choice you can make. It's not a lack of purpose. The purpose is preserving your sanity.
That's a brilliant distinction. Blind cynicism might be lazy, but informed cynicism is a shield. However, assuming you do want to achieve something in the world, the main takeaway from this law remains crucial. To survive the infectious, irrational downward pull of the group, you must listen to your inner voice and ruthlessly dedicate yourself to your unique life's work. Let your purpose be your armor.
And that dedication, that forward momentum brings us to our final law, Section 8, the law of aggression and mortality. It's not a controversial one.
This is where we bring all the energy together.
Okay, but I have a major pushback before we even start. The core premise here seems completely backward to me. We are socialized from preschool that aggression is inherently bad. Use your words, keep your hands to yourself, be a team player. We view aggression as a failure of emotional regulation. How can a book about mastering human nature and ostensibly becoming a better person claim that we actually need more aggression?
Because the text fundamentally redefines what the word aggression means in this context.
Okay, redefine it for me.
The core premise is that aggression is not just about punching someone or yelling. It is a latent, hardwired, massive reservoir of primal energy. And the text argues that when this energy is properly controlled, focused, and directed, it is actually the engine responsible for all major human achievement. Furthermore, it argues we must channel this aggressive energy with intense urgency because our time on Earth is finite.
Okay, I need an analogy for this because aggression still sounds bad to me.
Think of aggression like fire. If you leave a fire wild and uncontrolled, it burns your house down. That's the toxic aggression we are taught to fear. The road rage, the screaming boss, the violence. But if you take that exact same fire and you contain it tightly within the heavy iron walls of a furnace, it boils water, creates steam, and powers a massive locomotive forward.
So it's not about extinguishing the fire, it's about building a better furnace.
Precisely. And conceptually, this links perfectly as the ultimate culmination of our deep dive. This controlled, focused aggression is the ultimate antidote. If you apply relentless, aggressive work toward your unique calling, it cures the aimlessness we just talked about in Section 7. If you ground that work in the humbling reality of your inevitable mortality, it completely punctures the grandiosity and ego we discussed in Section 5. It is the final synthesis.
So how does the author prove we need this fire? What's the evidence?
First, the text aggressively tries to strip away our illusions about human history. It explicitly refutes the philosophical myth of the noble savage, the romanticized idea that early humans were entirely peaceful, harmonious creatures who were only later corrupted by the invention of modern society and capitalism.
Wait, so it argues we were always violent.
It argues that the savannah was brutal. Our species didn't survive by being passive. We survived, fought off predators, and conquered the globe precisely because we possessed an immense, innate, aggressive energy. To deny that energy is to deny our fundamental biology.
Okay, but how does that translate into the modern world where we aren't fighting off saber-toothed tigers? Give me an example of the furnace.
The text points to what it calls controlled aggression in the realm of intellect and invention. It looks at figures like Thomas Edison and, again, Albert Einstein. The argument is that these men didn't succeed simply because their IQs were slightly higher than their peers. They succeeded through a staggering, relentless, almost aggressive persistence. They would attack a problem for years, facing thousands of failures, pushing through immense mental resistance with a tenacity that the text equates to channeled aggression.
They battered down the door of the unknown.
Exactly.
But I have to apply our final critical observation right here. I understand the metaphor the author is going for, but by labeling quiet scientific persistence like Einstein sitting silently at a desk doing abstract thought experiments for a decade as aggression, the author is significantly stretching the psychological definition of the word.
It's a rhetorical stretch, definitely.
A massive one. It potentially confuses deep intellectual tenacity, discipline, and flow states with actual hostility or dominance. Calling Einstein aggressive might sound punchy and powerful in a self-help context, but it muddies the waters. Grit and aggression are not the same emotion, even if they both produce results.
That is a very fair critique of the semantics. It is essentially a dramatic rebranding of grit. But whether you choose to call it grit, extreme tenacity, or controlled aggression, the mechanical function and the urgency remain exactly the same. Which leaves us with our final main takeaway. Stop denying your primal energy and instead channel your aggression into persistent, focused action, using the visceral awareness of your approaching death to strip away your petty anxieties.
The ticking clock forces you to move, and that, incredibly, brings our deep dive full circle.
It's been a massive journey. If we synthesize everything we've uncovered today, we started by tracing the deepest roots of human nature all the way back to our evolutionary emotional wiring on the brutal savannah. We exposed the polite, protective social masks we wear, and we stared into the dark, repressed shadows hiding just beneath them. We examined the dangerous grandiosity that blinds us when we succeed, and the intoxicating mindless groupthink that drags us down into the herd. And finally, we arrived at the antidotes. Discovering an unshakable individual purpose, integrating the entirety of our cognitive styles, and harnessing our primal fire under the sobering reality of our own mortality.
It's a phenomenal amount of psychology to process. But I want to remind you, the listener, of one crucial thing before we wrap up. Staring this deeply into the sometimes dark, irrational, and manipulative mechanics of human nature shouldn't turn you into a paranoid cynic. In fact, the text offers a truly beautiful, liberating way to frame all of this. It suggests we should strive to view people as facts of nature.
Like trees or rocks.
Exactly. Like weather patterns. Think about it. When a sudden thunderstorm rolls in and ruins your perfect picnic, you don't take it personally. You don't scream at the clouds for holding a grudge against you. It's just the weather doing what weather does. Similarly, when you finally understand the deep, ancient evolutionary forces driving the people around you, you can finally stop taking their irrational, annoying, or even destructive behavior personally.
They aren't always out to get you. Sometimes their horse is just spooked. And understanding that allows you to observe them objectively, protect your own boundaries, and navigate the world with profound empathy instead of living in a state of constant, exhausting outrage.
It's the ultimate superpower. Empathy born from brutal realism. Before we sign off, I want to leave you with one final provocative thought that extends beyond the pages of this book. Green warns us that human nature is an absolutely immovable force. It is stronger than any political system or any technological invention. Ultimately, human nature inevitably ends up shaping whatever we create to perfectly reflect our own primitive roots.
Right, the tools get infinitely more advanced, but the primate holding the tool remains exactly the same.
So, if that is true, what does that mean for the rapidly approaching future of artificial intelligence? We are currently building the most powerful, expansive cognitive technology in the history of the world. Are we foolish enough to believe that AI will somehow transcend our biological flaws? Or, bound by the inescapable law of human nature, will it simply become the ultimate terrifying funhouse mirror? Will AI just amplify our most primitive tribal instincts, our darkest hidden shadows, and our boundless destructive grandiosity, but this time on a global, uncontrollable scale? We noted at the beginning that the psychological X-ray machine is broken. But considering what we are building, the stranger within us is about to get a whole lot louder, something to chew on.